Yeah. Next. Well, we got 3 people standing there, so let's do the 3 that are standing there. Okay.
Good morning, sir.
Hi.
Hi. I was wondering what your opinion is of the Federal Reserve and their actions taken recently. Do you feel they've done enough to boost the economy?
Yeah, well, I'm a fan of Alan Greenspan's over time. I've known him for a long, long time. We were on a board together at Cap Cities, and Alan is a very, very smart guy. He is motivated, in my opinion, entirely by what is good for the United States, people of the United States. And so you couldn't have a better person in there. And the problem he may have is that because his tenure in office has been associated with this incredible bull market, that even though he wouldn't have claimed credit for it, that people might associate it because of the importance of the Fed generally. They might associate with him, so they may, if things don't work out so well, they may blame him as well. But I think his policy has generally been very good. You have to understand one thing about the Fed is that it's not as powerful as the mystique would make it. Its brake is better than its gas pedal. When the Fed wants to put on the brakes, we go through the windshield. I mean, the economy just, they can put on the brakes. Paul Volcker did it. He broke inflation by doing it. But I mean, when he put on the brakes in that period around 1980, I mean, people hated him. He was crucified for it, but it was the right thing to do. And he could do it. He did it all by himself. And and it was the only way, because of the momentum that inflation was generating. It was the only thing it was what was needed then. Enormously unpopular. It's much harder for a Greenspan to put on the brakes because nobody wants him to put on the brakes, plus he's so visible. But he's put them on sort of gradually. But stepping on the gas pedal, he does not necessarily get the same result. It may help, but there are 1,000 other variables operating. And as you see in Japan, you can get down to 0 interest rates and you can't stimulate anything. So it isn't like the Japanese haven't read the same books we've read about economics. I mean, they've read Keynes and they've read the whole thing. So we're not smarter than they are. We don't have any secrets they don't have, but they don't know how to get their economy going. And, their GDP there has been gone no place, in the last 5 years, and there's still problems around. So easy money doesn't solve everything, but Greenspan could very well get blamed for the fact that he hasn't solved everything, and it's just not in his power to solve it. He can help in various ways, but I don't think you could have anybody better, and I think he's done the right thing to this point, but the right thing may not be quite as effective as people may hope that it would be. In economics, you always want to ask, and then what? You'll read in the paper, well, what happens if the Japanese start selling our government bonds, or what happens if they dump the dollar? They can't dump the dollar. There's no way to dump dollars. You can, or at least dollar assets, because if the Japanese want to sell our government bonds, if they sell them to us, they get a time deposit or a demand deposit at Citi, or they still own a dollar asset. If they sell them to the French, they may get some assets from the French, but now the French have it. I mean, the only way you can reduce foreign investment in the United States is to change it around so they're consuming more than we're consuming from them. I mean, when we buy a television set from Japan, if we buy more television sets from them than they buy equivalent consumables from us, the exchange, what balances things is we give them some investment type asset, whether it's cash or a U.S. government bond or our stocks or our movie studios or our real estate or different things. And the only way that reverses is when we start running a trade surplus, which we're miles away from. So logically, if you read classic economics, you would believe that our currency would have been weaker over the recent years, and that it would be weak now. But there are other things operating, and that's one of the problems about economics, is there's never just one variable. There's usually hundreds of variables, and they operate with different impact at different times. I mean, it's not like a physics formula. I mean, I guess it would be if you got into the Heisenberg principle or something like that. But the formula has a lot of the same variables year after year, but the relative importance of those variables and how they interact with each other is never exactly the same. And that's what we find out, the Japanese find out, everybody finds out. And And foreign currency, or the value of our dollar and currency rates, are defying what you would expect based on history. But as somebody said, if history were a perfect guide, the Forbes 400 would all be librarians. They just go and look it up in the books, and they'd always know all the answers. But history doesn't repeat itself, as Mark Twain said. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I mean, things come back, but they don't quite come back in the same form. And we'll understand all this perfectly in a few more years, why the dollar's behaved the way it has. But I think it would be useful net for the U.S. if the dollar were less strong.
Yes, Mr. Buffett, thanks for taking my question. My question pertains to small business, and my family's been in the truckload sector of transportation for about 50 years. And as you talked about the airline industry and all the mergers and acquisitions and things going on, and a lot of the smaller players being tossed out of the market, what do you see for people that, like in this room, for students that want to start a small business, and maybe they want to start in a business that is somewhat of a commodity type business, but as businesses, the large corporations get larger and their efficiencies increase, how can a small business compete with these people?
Yeah, in many areas, small businesses have an advantage. In other businesses, scale has a huge advantage. And I mean, you don't want to be a tiny carbon steel producer. On the other hand, when mini mills came along and learned how to use scrap more effectively than the older methods of making steel, they actually had an advantage. So scale is a huge advantage in some businesses. It's, the largest airlines haven't won. Southwest Airlines has won, starting with, just a few planes flying down there between Houston and Dallas. And they have become bigger, but their ambition hasn't been to be the biggest. And, they probably buy their fuel just as cheap as United, and they probably bought it, when they're a lot smaller. Walmart is a classic example. I mean, who would have thought 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I mean, here was Sears with a 100-story plus building in Chicago, had access to money far cheaper than Sam Walton. I mean, Sam Walton's credit was not as good as Sears. Every supplier wanted to do business with Sears. Nobody had ever heard of Sam. Every real estate developer who was developing a new shopping center went first to Sears, and Sam got the short end. So here's a guy starting in Bentonville, Arkansas, and he kills them over time. Just plain kills them. And disadvantage in buying, disadvantage in borrowing, disadvantage in real estate. Advantage, Sam Walton, and his ability to inspire, in the end, hundreds of thousands of people to be enthusiastic about going to work and doing the right things over time. So I would be just as optimistic about small business generally. Now, there's certain areas where scale is just plain important. But I see no disadvantage. We intentionally at Berkshire, we have 112,000 employees, more in Georgia than in any other state in the union, incidentally. We employ a lot up near Dalton, and we employ a lot of people in Macon at Geico. And we intentionally, with our 112,000 employees, we probably have, I don't know how many business units, but lots. And we only have 13.8 people at headquarters. I'm not the 0.8, incidentally. I resent it when people think that. I'm a full, but we have one woman that works 4 days a week. And that's all we have at headquarters, 112,000 people, 105 billion a market cap. But we intentionally keep our units small. We think, we want them to have the nimbleness, the responsiveness to the customer particularly, that will turn them, that essentially will more than offset anything that the scale of having maybe a little more purchasing power or something will develop. We own a home furnishings business in Utah, run by a fellow named Bill Child. He was featured in Fortune about one issue ago. The cover story was God in Business. Bill was the #1 illustration. Bill took that business from his father-in-law when it was doing $250,000 a year, and he now has over half the business in Utah in his field, about close to $400 million. He built it by thinking about the customer. And the truth was, he was competing with Sears, he was competing with Levitt's, was a huge furniture retailer in the past. He was competing with everybody. But all he thought about from the moment he got up in the morning was, how do I take care of my customer? And that wins. We have a business in Omaha, some of you may have heard of. It's the largest home furnishing store in the world. In Omaha, which only has a SMSA of 650,000 people. It's on 72 acres. It does $325 million in one location, which happens to be $500 for every man, woman, and child in the SMSA, but it draws from beyond that. That business comes about, or has resulted from an investment of $500 in 1937 by a woman who walked out of Russia in 1921. She walked out, got on a peanut boat, landed in Seattle with a tag around her neck. She couldn't speak one word of English. The American Red Cross looked at the tag. It said Fort Dodge, Iowa. They got her to Fort Dodge, Iowa. She couldn't pick up the language. She was there 2 years. She said she felt like a dummy. So she came to Omaha because there were other Russian Jews there and she'd at least have somebody to talk to. Her little girl started school, Frances. Frances would come home at night and teach her mother the words she learned in school that day. That's how this woman, Rose Blumpkin, learned the English language, but from her daughter from kindergarten on, teaching her the words. She brought 7 siblings over from Russia, one at a time, $50 every time she saved $50. She sold used clothing and other works. She got her 7 siblings over, her mother and father, and by 1937, 16 years after she got here, she saved $500. She got on a train, went to Chicago, to the American Furniture Mart, which was this huge, impressive thing. She was smart as hell, but she thought like a peasant in a way, and she saw this building and she decided to name her company the Nebraska Furniture Mart. She went in and bought $500 worth of, she bought about $2,000 worth of merchandise. All the way back to Omaha, she worried because she thought, I owe $1,500, and she only had a $500 equity. So she got to Omaha. She took the bed, the sofa, the refrigerator out of her own home to sell fast so she could get the money so she could pay on time. She took that business and built it from that start. No one would sell to her. She went into court 4 times because the carpet manufacturers tried to keep her from selling at a discount, and she went into court and told the judge, because she figured out ways to buy this stuff in various nefarious ways from had other people buy it for her, and she said, look, I pay $3 a yard for this carpet. Brandeis sells it for $6.98. She says, I sell it for $3.98. Just tell me, Judge, how much you want me to rob people. She defended herself. Papers wrote it up. The judge bought carpet from her the next day. I mean, it was marvelous. Brandeis isn't selling anymore. They were the huge department store in Omaha. She put everybody out of business. And the punchline, she worked till she was 103. She sold me the business when she was 89. And she didn't have an audit. I went out to see her one afternoon. I took a check out with me and because I knew she wanted to do something. And I said, Mrs. B, here's the money. I said, I don't need an audit. Just tell me whether you owe any money. She said, I've never owed any money since I owed those guys back in 1937. And she said, it's all free and clear. She'd never seen a balance sheet. She didn't know what accounting terms meant, but she understood the nature of the business. And I told her, I said, I'd rather have your word, than an audit from every one of the big 6 or big 8 or whatever there were, the number at the time of the top auditing firms. And she worked till she was 103. She died at 104. She had 3 siblings at her funeral. I mean, those are some genes. Her son works there now. He's 82 or 3, and the 3 sisters are all alive. But the punchline is, she couldn't read or write. This woman could not read or write. If you told her this room was 68 feet by 43, she would tell you how many square yards it was like that. She never went to school a day in her life. She would tell you how much that was at $5.98 a yard. She'd add the tax. She'd knock off something because she liked your looks, and that would be it. And that is that you can't beat that, and you can't replicate that at General Motors. You can't institutionalize that. The person who brings that kind of drive to a business and does it day after day and thinks about their customer, and that's all she did. She raised 4 kids in the process too, but it can't miss. And no, you don't have to worry if you're an entrepreneur. In most fields, there's some fields where you can't do it because there are scale aspects to it. But in most fields, you'll kill people. Bob Shaw did that with Shaw. Nobody ever heard of Shaw in carpet 30 years ago. He's got 40% of the carpet business in the country. So it's a great field of opportunity out there, and I don't know about trucking specifically, but I wish you the best on it. And You won't be at a disadvantage in many fields if you're small, and you'll actually have an advantage. George, thank you.
Mr. Buffett, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and your ideas and your wonderful stories with us today. We are truly honored and pleased that we've had this opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. I'd like to thank a couple people before we conclude for helping with the logistics. Associate Dean Bob Gatewood, our Director of Alumni Relations, Marie Garrison. Thank both of you. David Dodson, our Director of Communications. There's a lot of work and effort went into this, and I thank all of you for all that you've done. And Earl, again, thank you for helping make this possible. Mr. Buffett, we have a parting gift for you, but it needs to be placed into context before we show you what it is. In your most recent newsletter to your annual report to the shareholders, you discussed some of the things that you look for in making acquisitions, and one of the things you talked about was owners. You look for owners who care who they sell to, and that was important to you. I'd like to quote from your report. When a business masterpiece has been created by a lifetime or several lifetimes of unstinting care and exceptional talent, it should be important to the owner what corporation is entrusted to carry on its history. A little bit further down you say, how much better it is for the painter of a business Rembrandt to personally select its permanent home than to have a trust officer or uninterested heirs auction it off. Well, we believe that many of these words apply to you as well. You too have created a business masterpiece. You too have created a Rembrandt. What we have today is a lighthearted portrait, a lighthearted characterization that we hope captures some of the business milestones in your career, and we hope also captures some of that quick-witted humor that you demonstrated today. It was painted by a good friend of ours and a well-known artist, lives here locally, Alan Campbell. Alan is with us, and he will help unveil it today. Alan, please come down. Now, when he unveils this, please understand that you're not going to be able to see the detail of this from where you're sitting, but we would invite you to come down and walk past it as you leave today. Alan, if you're going to speak, come over to the microphone, please.
Well, thank you, and Mr. Buffett, I hope you'll maintain your sense of humor, which appealed to me greatly when reading your corporate report, and this is going to be a test of that famous humor. But it is intended to be a portrait both of you and of your company and of your values. And when Marie Garrison, my girlfriend, the alumni director here, told me you were coming, and I read the comments about the Rembrandts and lying on your back and feeling like you could lie on your back and paint the ceiling every day at Berkshire, you basically opened the door with your own words. So, and just on an aside, my brother's one of your pilots for Executive Jet. So, the one thing that's not included is a reference to the jewelry company, so you've been spared the jewelry. This is based on a very famous Rembrandt self-portrait, if anybody's information.
Mr. Buffett will sign autographs. If you've got books with you you'd like him to sign, we'll set up a table down front here as for the next 15 or 20 minutes. If you'd like to take a picture, if you've got a camera with you, please come on up. Don't hesitate. And thank you all for coming and participating today. It was a wonderful event. Thank you very much.